Ever since the camera was invented, photographers have been taking pictures of ordinary and not so ordinary people in the street or in public. These days there seems to be significant legislation about what I can and can't take pictures of. But does this legislation affect me in this particular paranoid and litigious age, when people are worried about surveillance, identity fraud and taking pictures of children? The question I'm asking is, what are the legal and ethical issues about taking street photography? In this video I discuss the legality and issues of taking a picture in the new technology age. Today most people are walking around with the camera on their phone with the capability to take high-def images of whatever happens to be in front of them. The first issue that Bloom and Ota 2014 cite is that there is no single umbrella law that covers image rights. Currently there may be a number of acts that may be broken, included but not limited to these acts. These are very large documents which are not easy to read for the layperson. More importantly, they are very difficult to understand and difficult to understand the implication or intention of the acts. The current law regarding data protection is the UK GDPR, supplemented by the DPA 2018 Act. This came into effect on the 1st of January 2021. The first thing to establish is what law might I be breaking specifically. Amongst photographers, especially street photographers, people will come up and say, "You're not allowed to take pictures here, mate." So what is the law that they might be breaking? The first thing to say, it is unlikely you are breaking any law. There is no specific law that prohibits you or me from taking photos if you're on public land, but sadly it's not that simple. I am taking pictures in the grounds of St Albans Cathedral, as I have permission to be here. But if I didn't, I would need to stand over there in the road in a public place. More on the law of panorama later. So the next question is anyone in the photo, and am I breaking any laws by taking a picture of them? And if I am, what law? Sadly, another simple question, but not a simple answer. As mentioned earlier, there are a whole raft of acts of law that might be involved, but let's assume that these photos are not indecent, you're not taking pictures for the purpose of terrorism or harassment, and you're not taking pictures of an MOD building. So, we have a simple picture of someone in the street as an example. Firstly, under the Copyright Design and Patents Act 1988, the photographer owned all the rights to the photography. Excellent. Job done, as cited by Holly Hancock in her paper of 2020. However, this is not the end of the story. Herts University has a data policy which says the definition, as defined by the UK GDPR Act, also includes data held visually, in photographs or video clips, including closed-circuit television, or audibly on sound recordings. It is worth noting that the EU GDPR Act of 2016 only mentions photography once in relation to biometrics and does not mention video at all. What does Mick Yates have to say on the matter?
I think that there is often a sense of paranoia in different groups about infringing regulations which frankly aren't really an issue. And you even see that in camera clubs who think twice about putting certain photographs on a website because it's got people in them in the street. Well, fine. That's actually not a legal problem whatsoever, but they feel like it might be because it seems to be a personal issue rather than a legal issue. So I think paranoia isn't a good thing.
In summary, there are a lot of things that people think are covered by the Act, which in fact aren't. The ICO essentially say that images where the data is not obviously about an individual and is not going to be used to identify individuals is not covered by the Act. As well, images for artistic or academic purposes are similarly not covered by the Act. It is important to note that street pictures of children are not covered. It is probably common sense not to take pictures, but actually they are not included.
And there's nothing that stops you even of taking pictures of children in the street. That's simply something that these days we all take as, well, we probably shouldn't do it, as opposed to a law saying you shouldn't do it. So the general law on taking pictures in candid pictures in a public space, which is how I define street photography, is actually very liberal in the UK.
Last thing on UK GDPR. Again, in the current era, it is likely photos are to be used for personal use. But is this personal use simply to put in an album and put on a shelf, or is it to put on social media? But then if you have 1 million followers, this could be construed as commercial use. And does this photo contain personal data? i.e., is the photo tagged to say, photo of Tony Barr? And therefore, does this fall under UK GDPR or Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which provides, quote, provides a right to respect one's private and family life, home and correspondence, unquote. So, are there any buildings in your photograph? Yes? Oh dear. Buildings are copyright, but actually there is some good news here, and surprisingly simple. Buildings are protected by copyright under English law, but there is a specific exception under Section 62 of the Copyright Designs and Patents Act 1988, which permits you to take a photograph or film of a building without infringing its copyright. This is also known as the law of panorama. Be careful of logos and brands, however. Back to Mick.
So, as you also said, there are other laws that do apply. And one of the most important is what's called the law of panorama. And what that does is it allows you to take photographs panoramically of pretty much anything you want, basically. And as long as that's on public ground. Now, there is, of course, the thing that lots of shopping malls are private property, parts of docklands are private property, and so on and so forth. So in theory, the owners and therefore the security guards of those places could stop you taking photographs, because it's their land and it's not public property. In practice, frankly, that very rarely happens. But the law of panorama is quite important because it allows you to take pictures of pretty much whatever you want to take pictures of.
When I started my research in this area, I thought DPA, GDPR, copyright would be the biggest issues. But what I didn't expect was that the Defamation Act of 2013 was going to be there as well. But this law is something street photographers need to be aware of.
The laws that are more likely to lead you into trouble are things about defamation, which again, you often see people on Facebook doing pictures of, I don't know, somebody in a very embarrassing pose in the middle of the street eating something, hamburger drooping out of the left side of their mouth or something. If there's no legal reason why you can't take that picture, there's no legal reason why you can't post that on social media or put it on your website. There's no legal reason why you can't sell it. There would be a legal reason if you used it for commercial advertising purposes to sell a hamburger. That would stop you using it because you can't do that without a model release. And once you've used it, even if you had it in a book of photographs that you were selling as street photographs, there's nothing to stop you doing that, to my understanding. But if somebody saw that image that was, put in a bad light, they could, in theory, take you to court for defamation or something like that.
Mick briefly touched on the area of model consent and model consent forms. This form establishes a contract between the photographer and a model. It defines a number of things, including how and where the image may be used and the basis of payment. This gives the model and the photographer some protection in the event of a dispute. This is likely to reference the DPA Act, GDPR and Copyright Act as previously discussed. This form is only necessary if you plan to sell the images commercially. Images used in news stories count as editorial usage, so they do not require a consent form. But if that same image was then used in a commercial environment, i.e. advertising, then a consent form would be required. Similar to the Data Protection Act, if the person in the photo is the subject of the photo and they are recognisable, then you are likely to need a release form. With the help of Mick Yates, I have covered what is the current position, but what are some of the issues that may impact street photography in the future? In this global era and global social media, your work could end up being viewed anywhere in the world. So what are the implications for this for the street photographer? Also, this technological pace is reflected in developments like CCTV and facial recognition, which are becoming more pervasive, and the legal system is still playing catch-up in a lot of these areas around this technology. If an image can be displayed on the screen, and it can be snipped or have a picture taken of that picture, and that subsequent image has lost all the metadata from the original and is therefore difficult to track. Also, the new clipped image, is that a new picture and therefore covered under a different copyright owner? This area is very unclear legally. We have now established that there are many acts that may or may not impact a street photographer. I would suggest that this is not the whole picture. There is a whole facet of ethical photography. I realise my question was about the legality of street photography, but just because you can take a photograph does not mean that you should. Taking pictures of homeless people or people with mental issues should be something that needs to be considered very carefully before pointing the camera at someone because it makes a nice photograph. Street photography does not have to be a covert exercise, and alternatively, you do not have to be in someone's face either, in the style of Bruce Gilden. A common sense approach needs to be taken, although everyone has a different interpretation of common. In summary, this is a very complex area and there's so many caveats and interpretations. I have just brushed the surface of these in this 12-minute film. However, to answer my original question, what are the legal issues concerning street photography? And by and large, there are no real issues for the average photographer, but that same photographer needs to have a basic understanding of the law so that they don't fall foul of them accidentally, and also to act ethically and with common sense.